Oh, hello. Welcome. My name is Nathan, and this is my tea shop. Oh, welcome. I hope you're doing okay. Actually, I was just putting some things away, but if you'd like, I can show you around and tell you a little bit more about tea. Oh, that's great. Well, why don't you take a seat over there, and I will go ahead and maybe brew you a cup. We can light a candle or two and chat a little bit more about tea, and maybe that will help you come to a decision about what kind of beverage or what kind of drink you like, flavors you like, and things of that nature. Let me grab this here. This is a candle Ernesto, and it has an interesting story, actually, that I'd love to read to you if you would be willing to listen. Let me set this over here, and we can light it and read the story. So, this is the Ernesto candle here. And as you can see, there's a pretty interesting story here. I'm going to read it to you. And see what you think. In a hotel of Havana, under the fixed sun of the revolution, the fierce and partisan overtones of leather and tobacco meddle with the panelling's waxen silence. In the cool dimness, fawn grimaces shimmer along with the smoke of cigars and the barrels of guns. So let's light this candle here, and we can talk a little bit more about tea. Let's do this here. I have this very interesting matchbox set here that I'm a big fan of here. So let's go ahead and light this. I think that's lit there. So this has very interesting flavors of vanilla and leather and tobacco as well, but it's very pleasant. So I thought it'd be nice to start with this here. And did you know perhaps maybe what kind of teas you were looking for? Okay, let me set this over here, and let me start the brewer, and we can actually have a cup of tea to begin here. So let me just hit this here. Okay. So why don't you take a seat over here, and as this starts to boil, we can talk more about the history here. So this is actually, I'm going to go ahead and pour you a cup of this Japanese tea here. It's sort of an herbal tea. And as you can see, it's definitely green tea with some interesting flavors. So I'm gonna do this here. And it's almost done boiling here, so it should be just a moment. So there's actually another tea I wanted to talk about, and that's this Japanese herbal tea here. And it's in this beautiful red jar here, which I think is really beautiful. the way that they decorate just everything, and it's really just an interesting thing to look at here. So as you can see, here's the tea here. So I'm going to pour you a cup of this, and then let's look further into the selection here, and maybe you can decide what you would like to drink. Okay. Well, here, let's go and pour this cup here for you. I'm going to put this right here for you. So let's let this steep for a little bit, and we can talk more about the other selection here. Okay, great. Alright, so welcome, and it's time for us to take a look at some of the different teas here, and we can actually try some of these different flavors and essences. So what I have here is a selection of different teas. We have a green tea. We have the teas I mentioned earlier, the Japanese green teas and herbal teas. And we have the sleepy time tea. We have Earl Grey. And we've got a assortment here in this blue box here. We can go through some of the different tea bags and different styles and varieties of teas and see what they look like and what they smell like. And so was there any particular one you wanted to try first? Or maybe we could actually talk a little bit about the history of tea and how we got to this point here. And then maybe we can go through each one and talk about it in more detail. So, tea is a evergreen shrub, and it was discovered about 5,000 years ago. But it's indigenous to both China and India. Tea varies in characteristics, in flavor, according to the type of soil, the altitude, and the climatic condition of the area where it grows. The history of tea is long and complex, spreading across multiple cultures over the span of thousands of years. So, according to the story of tea drinking likely began in the Yunnan province in China during the Shang dynasty. It was 1500 BC to 1046 BC, and in the beginning it was a medicinal drink, so people began to spread, and they began to boil the tea leaves and have it as more than just a medicinal concoction, but one that is stimulating. In one popular Chinese legend, Shenong, the former emperor of China was drinking a bowl of just boiled water due to a decree that his subjects must boil water before drinking it. Sometime around 2737 BC, a few leaves were blown from a nearby tree into his water, changing the color and the taste. The emperor took a sip of the brew and was pleasantly surprised by its flavor, and also its restorative properties. A variant of this legend tells that the emperor tested the medical properties of various herbs on himself, and some of them poisonous, and he found tea to work as an antidote. So this connects to other Chinese legends, and in my opinion, I think it's sort of a melding of the two legends. So a Chinese legend goes that the god of agriculture would chew the leaves, stems, and roots of various plants to discover medicinal herbs. And if he consumed a poisonous plant, he would chew the tea leaves to counteract them. So, whether or not these legends have any fact, it's essentially tea's been a very important part of Asian culture for centuries. And it really was a status symbol. And there are both religious and royal origin stories. So, tea production in China has a storied past, or a legend almost. And one example is the story that is told very often, that is, there was a village where monkeys will actually pick the tea. And according to this legend, the villagers stand below the monkeys and taunt them, and in turn the monkeys will grab the handfuls of tea leaves and throw them at the villagers. So that's sort of a legend. I don't think you would find that actually. It's probably be a real harvesting technique, but it's very interesting to say the least. So tea spread to Japan, which is where this is from. That was in the 6th century AD. And it started as a drink for the religious classes. And there was a big crossover between Chinese and Japanese culture throughout the centuries. And essentially that aristocratic elite custom took hold there as well. So it's very interesting to think about. So then it really picked up in Korean culture as well. And the first historical record documents the offering of tea to an ancestral god. That's as of right in the year 661, which tea offering was made to the spirit of King Suro. So that's around the same general time frame spread to Korea as well, and Japan. And during the Joseon dynasty in 1392 to 1910, the royal Yi family and the aristocracy used tea for simple rites. So it was used during religious ceremonies as well. Now the practice of drinking tea spread to various cultures throughout Europe, and was an Arabian traveler who really was the first to bring it into the Western sphere. And Marco Polo, of course, records some evidence of tea as well. As back in those days, it was quite rare, and there's I think, a currency aspect related to tea as well. So it was first introduced to Europe by the Italian traveler Giovanni Battista Ramusio, who in 1555 brought back tea which he called chai katai. So that's really when it spread into Portuguese culture and really throughout Europe. So let's go and look through some of these different teas and see if there might be one you'd be interested to try. So let's go ahead and see which one of these might be to your liking. So why don't I tell you a little bit about each one, and then maybe you'll be able to tell me which one you like the best. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over here. And the first tea we have here is green tea. And green tea is made from leaves and buds that have not undergone the oxidation process used to make like black and oolong teas. And this is the type of tea that we spoke about with Emperor Shennong in 2737 BC. And the history of green tea is really the beginning of all tea. And as you can see, this one is just Twinings, which is a British company. But we can just look at the bag and see what it looks like here in one of these cups. So we have these tea bags here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 bags. So let's go and put this down here. And this is really a drink that, again, lies with the history of the Chinese culture. And let's go ahead and open it up and see. So let's go ahead and pour ourselves some hot water. And we can listen to the sounds of this boiling as we pour our cup of delicious tea. Thankfully, I already pre-boiled some water, so it should finish very quickly. Okay, that sounds like it might be ready to go. So let's go ahead and pour a cup here. So as you can see, it's a nice pale color here, and it's delicious as a refreshing beverage for any time of the day, actually, and even in the evening. So let's I've spilled a little bit there. My apologies. Let's have a sip of this here and tell me what you think. That's delicious, actually. So let's try go and put this here. So next we have Earl Grey Tea. And Earl Grey is a tea that's been flavored with the addition of bergamot. And the fragrant oil is added to the black tea to give the Earl Grey its unique flavors. So we've got this tea is actually traditionally made to be drunk without milk, but that custom has obviously changed over the years. And let's go ahead and open up a bag of this and take a further look here. So Earl Grey is named after, the legend goes, Charles Grey, the second Earl Grey. And it was a gift of tea that was flavored with the bergamot oil. And Grey's tea is known from the 1850s. But the first references are from a company by Charlton and Co. of Tremaine Street in London in the 1880s. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at this one and see how you feel about this one here. So the water's already boiled, so we can just go ahead and pour a cup here. So, as you can see here, this one is let steep a little bit. But it's a much richer color here. And that comes from the oxidation process of the leaves. So, that longer process allows the color to take on a different, darker, oranger color. You can try a sip here. Sip as well. Yeah, it's really delicious. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next tea, and let these steep, and we'll put it right here. So the next thing we have here is the Sleepy Time tea, which is here. Now let's go ahead and grab it. So this is an herbal tea, and I really strongly recommend it for sleeping, and I mean, there's a lot of different types of herbal tea, but this one I find very useful. And let me go ahead and read you some of the ingredients in this particular tea here. So, it's chamomile, spearmint, lemongrass, tilia flowers, blackberry leaves, orange blossoms, hawthorn, and rosebuds. So let's take a look. And we can go ahead and brew up a cup of this here and see how we feel about it. So here we are. So here's the sleepy time tea. Can we let it steep for just a few moments here? And you can smell the chamomile and the lemongrass. So here, try a sip of this. Let me try a sip as well. That's delicious. It's also a very light color, you can see here. And chamomile is actually one of those medicinal, I think we'll talk about it actually in a few moments here, but it's one of those herbal remedies that have been used even by the ancient Egyptians. So we'll set this here, and we're going to go ahead and open up our box of Blue Ribbon. It's just a sort of like a assortment of different teas, so we could just talk about different ones, and you can decide which one you'd like. So we'll set this here. So now we're going to go ahead and open this tea assortment, this box of teas. And we can just go through each one and learn more about them. So let's look here and open it up. Most of this, I think, is Twinings or Twinings tea. But as you can see, it's a whole selection. So let's maybe go through some of these teas and talk about them a little bit and see if you might be interested to try some. So why don't I go ahead and move this tea kettle, because I don't think we're going to need this here. And we can just go ahead and lay these out here and see what we think. So let's move this here, and we'll start with this here. So the first one is a black tea with a black currant breeze. We have some English breakfast decaffeinated. With lemon. Here's one. So this is pure chamomile, and we talked a little bit about this, but let's maybe talk a little bit more in detail, we can go ahead and open up this chamomile bag. And you can see it's an herbal tea. It's steeped in 4 minutes. And chamomile, I'll put this right here. So chamomile comes from the Greek word meaning ground apple. And its history dates back to the Egyptian times. The Romans also enjoyed it as a remedy and beverage, as well as an incense. It's a herbal infusion, which is made from dried flowers and hot water. So it's historically been used in beer, and back in the ancient times, it was associated with the deities of the sun. So in Egypt, chamomile was sacred to the sun god Ra, and was highly revered over all other herbs. So chamomile flowers are found depicted in many ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics dating back to 2,000 years ago. And chamomile was not only valued for its ability to heal ailments, but Egyptian nobility also used it in their beauty regimen. It's also one of the 9 sacred herbs in Anglo-Saxon culture. Ancient Greek physicians made frequent mentions of chamomile. Some of the things that it's used for are inflammation, and helps with sleep and respiratory type illnesses. Again, this is just an herbal remedy, but that's how it was used traditionally. Let's go with more of these teas. Buttermint. And herbal tea dates back a long time as well. It's really the first teas, where something was put in hot water was most likely of an herbal origin. But of course, green tea has the history, but this is sort of the unwritten, that's the historical assumption, I believe. It's lemon ginger. We have nightly calm. Here's an interesting one. We have 100%, this is oolong tea. And it's really hard to say the origin of this type of tea, but it was first existed in the Wuyi mountain region, and it was said that oolong was named after this part of Wuyi mountain where it was originally produced. And there is some, there's not really any official records, but the legend proclaims that one late evening, after a day of plucking, the tea grower on his way back was distracted by a deer. He forgot to process the leaves that day, and they began to wilt and oxidize, and they had started to brown a little bit, but he decided to subject them to more oxidation, and they created this sort of a black tea, but without the bitterness and the tannic strength. And it was just a bit sweeter and smoother, so he named the tea after himself, which was Oolong. Also, I think, just to add, because many of these things have multiple origins, but in Mandarin, Oolong also means black dragon, and this is how the tea also became to be known as the Black Dragon Tea. Another theory attributes the origins of Oolong tea to the Tang Dynasty and this idea of a tribute tea. And tribute teas were, gifts, diplomatic gifts, essentially. And they were given in the form of a brick that was stamped with the seal of the phoenix, or the dragon. So when the concept of brick teas went out of fashion, the teas were made into loose leaf teas. And they had the bearings of oolong tea, which is naturally oxidized in bamboo basket and then rolled into small curls and baked in an oven. So I can open this up here. Excuse me. So you can kind of smell a more mild flavor. I'll put this right here. And we'll go ahead and continue our teas here. So the next one that we have here is an English breakfast tea. Just right here. And English breakfast tea is very popularized since really the 1800s, and it's been attributed in part to Queen Victoria. At Balmoral in 1892, she tasted a blend and returned to London with a supply. And this tea had a Scottish origin, but it subsequently acquired the prefix English. So this is sort of the beginning of the legend of English tea, because it's such a big part of the culture there. The tea etiquette really begins with the English breakfast tea. So some believe that the influence of sipping tea at breakfast derives from Queen Anne during the late 1600s, although others believe that the famous breakfast tea blend was invented in Scotland, as I mentioned, originally known as breakfast tea. And then, essentially, it was, some people would say that actually the British tea merchant Richard Davies brought the brew to American households in the 1800s, and that was the beginning of the popularization. And it's really become a social practice there in England. And tea etiquette is very important. So I'm going to read you some of the rules of tea and open this as well. So the rules of English tea are: when seated, place the purse on your lap or behind your back, against your chair. Always greet with a friendly handshake. Unfold your serviette on your English breakfast. On your lap, excuse me. Not on your breakfast. Spoon placement. That's the spoon always rests behind the cup, and there's never left in the cup itself. While sipping, always look into your teacup and never look over it. English tea should always be served with milk or thinly sliced lemon. And if your guests require sugar, ensure that they put the sugar in first, then follow with the tea and the milk. Never put milk and lemon together. So there's some rules there. Let's go and open this one. And it definitely has smells like a black tea. It smells delicious as well. Next we have a black tea with mixed berry. We have an Irish breakfast tea. Here's one that's quite interesting that I'd like to talk about further. And this is a chai tea. And this one is French vanilla, but there was also spiced apple or some of these other. This, I believe, is just the regular one. But chai tea means spice tea, masala chai, and it's steeped in tales of royalty and herbal medicine. According to lore, masala chai's history began thousands of years ago in an ancient royal court. Some say it was created 9,000 years ago, while others claim 5,000. But essentially, there's stories that the court was located in what is now India. And there are historians that do attribute it to Thai origins as well. So it was essentially created as a vivifying Ayurvedic beverage. So it had traditional herbal and medicinal properties. And it originated from the Hindustani term chai, which is originated from the Chinese word for tea, cha. And essentially, it's become popular in Western culture, in the United States, even as late as the 1990s. But essentially, it's leaves some of the spicy flavors and the tannins that make it sort of more flavorful in that way. In some areas, people drink an average of 4 small cups of chai per day, which is, a popular time is about 4 p.m., so sort of around tea time, with an afternoon snack. Tea plants have, of course, we associate it with China, but tea plants have also grown in the Assam region since antiquity. And but it was really not viewed as a beverage you would drink just casually. Again, it was a medicinal drink. But in the 1830s, the British brought their tea drinking habits with them, and essentially they used. This is a negative, but from a colonialism aspect, they did use those plantations to grow tea to suit their tastes. And of course, as time passed, the Indian culture adopted those practices. And that's how you end up with chai tea that you see today, because, again, it was different. It's a blend of spices, and there are actually chai vendors in India, so it's a bit different depending on where you are going. So, so it's really interesting one as well. We have peppermint. We have black tea and Prince of Wales. And we can just talk about black tea in general, which is actually really interesting. So it's essentially the leaves are oxidized, and the story is that the army passed through Fujian from Jiangxi province and set up camp in the Wuyi Mountains, and they stalled the tea production. So scores of tea products were left sitting idly until the army left. And this event caused the teas to oxidize longer than usual, but when the locals returned to check on the tea, they found the color of the tea leaves had become red. And then they decided to go on. So instead of using tea, they used pine. Instead of, like, one of the ways they oxidize it was changed. In this instance, it was pine wood, and that really imbued it with a smoky flavor. That's actually, we'll talk about the original version of that. But that's basically it's was widely traded and almost currency throughout Central Asia. So let's open it up and smell. Okay. Let's continue onward here. Orange and cinnamon spice. Wild berries. Pure green tea. We talked a little bit about the history of that. We have pomegranate and raspberry. Honeybush, mandarin, and orange. White tea. Green tea, nightly calm. This is like green tea for sleeping. It's decaffeinated, that's why. Chamomile, honey, and vanilla. Lemon delight. This one I'll get to here in a few moments. English afternoon tea. Earl Grey that we've spoken about. Lady Grey. There's just a different style of it. Of Earl Grey. So we'll flavor it with the bergamot. A couple more Earl Greys we'll stick here. Alright, we're almost done with our selection here, and then hopefully you can come to a decision about which one you'd like. So we have a green tea that's a pomegranate, raspberry, and strawberry. A couple different green teas, jasmine, mint, and decaffeinated. So here's another one I'd like to show you. That's the Darjeeling Tea. And Darjeeling is considered to be the champagne of teas. And it comes from an area situated in the foothills of the Indian Himalayas, ranging from 100 to 4,200 meters. And it's the mountainous region that borders Nepal and Tibet. So most of the tea bushes in Darjeeling owe their origins to tea seeds in China, and it was smuggled out by the famous Scot adventurer and botanist Robert Fortune nearly 200 years ago. They followed a tortuous winding path, and essentially they made it back on a perilous journey. By 1850, it was Britain was consuming about 2 pounds per person, and the English were upset about having to rely on Chinese origins for tea. So they wanted their own source, and that was the beginning of Darjeeling, which was just began as a hamlet of a few houses in a remote part of the Himalayas to a hill resort, and finally the producer of teas. So due to its cool weather and topography, Darjeeling seemed the ideal place to experiment with tea cultivation. In 1841, they planted tea bushes that had been, cultivated, as I mentioned, and 6 years they had their first tea nursery. So, it was a very complicated situation, but by 1866, Darjeeling had 39 gardens producing 21,000 kilograms of tea. So, it's very world famous. Let's go and open it up and smell it as well. Okay. So the next teas that we have are here. We have the Lady Grey, another green tea, a nightly calm, which is again kind of like the sleepy time. The berry fusion, pure peppermint tea, so the next one I want to show you is iced tea, and we have peach, classic, and mixed berries, and it's a cold beverage. It's been usually is sweetened often, and most of the iced teas get the flavor from the leaves, but there are herbal iced teas. The oldest recipes actually date back to the 1870s. There was 2 books, 1876, 1877. And that was really the beginning of the history of iced tea in the United States, which is where it's very popular. It was seen as a novelty at first, but eventually in the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, Richard Bletchinden really marketed it the right way, and he was sampling hot tea, but it was in the intense summer heat, so he put ice in it, and it was a hit. As I said, there was various examples, like in 1795, South Carolina, for example. That was really the beginning of tea in the United States. And the historians agree that it was really part of a tea plantation in Charleston. It was one of these wealthy French explorers, André Michaux, and he grew other types of gardenias, azaleas, and other plants, and he brought tea plants here, and it succeeded. So that kind of seeded the culture for tea later on down the road. So let's go ahead and continue on. We have a few more left here, and then just let me know which one you want me to bag up for you. We have here the Rooibos tea, and this is essentially really, it could have been utilized, it's not for sure, but it could have been utilized by humans thousands of years ago in South Africa, but not necessarily as a tea. But when the colonialists came down to South Africa, the Dutch and the English, they noticed the locals using this, and they turned it into a tea form, so it became popular. The import cost for tea, English tea, down to South Africa was expensive, and so as an alternative, they would sip on rooibos, red tea. So that's really the origins for rooibos. And here's another rooibos. We can open this one and see how it smells. Put this here. It smells delicious. Then lastly, we have my favorite, which is Lapsang Souchong, and that is a smoked tea. It's a black tea that's, as I mentioned this earlier, and the legend is that, as I mentioned, there was an army invaded a village, and they didn't have time to process for the green tea. And the oxidization process caused it to turn black, and they used pine wood to speed it up because they didn't have enough time to bring it to the market. And that created that smoky flavor. And, actually the real story, that's the legend, but the real story is that the Chinese tea producers began exporting their tea to Europe and the Americas, and it didn't travel very well as green tea. So they used this was a 15 to 18 month journey. So they used this process to allow for better preservation. So, let's see how this smells, and then I'll back up whatever you'd like here. Okay. I'll put this here for you to try. So, I think that's about it. That's most of the products that I have there. Is there anything that you, any questions or any of the particular ones you would like to take home with you? Oh, you'd like to take all of them home with you. Well, that's fantastic. Why don't I go ahead and bag some of these up, and we can I'll put them in a bag for you to take home. It's been really great chatting with you about tea and about the history of tea, and I look forward to seeing you again.